Implementación de energías renovables en el sector minero y la transición energética. El uso de los combustibles fósiles genera dióxido de carbono, CO2 y otros gases de efecto invernadero. Este fenómeno hace que la temperatura del planeta se eleve y genere alteraciones en los ecosistemas, por lo que hay un consenso general sobre la necesidad de buscar otras fuentes de energía y avanzar en medidas de eficiencia energética. Este salto de producción de energía desde combustibles fósiles a otras fuentes bajas en emisiones de carbono es lo que se conoce como transición energética, y la industria extractiva juega un rol protagónico en ella. Con la pandemia del COVID-19 y la volatilidad de los mercados, se abre la pregunta si esta transición se acelerará o, por el contrario, si los bajos precios de los combustibles fósiles la retrasarán. La industria tiene varios papeles en este escenario. El primero, como productor de materiales que generan gases de efecto invernadero, como el carbón y el petróleo. Un segundo rol, como productor de materiales indispensables para las nuevas tecnologías, como el cobre, el cobalto o el litio. Y un tercer rol, como usuario de energías, por lo que puede influir en la manera en la que ésta se produce y privilegiar las energías bajas en carbono. A pesar de que hay un consenso generalizado y respaldo político, ¿cómo afrontar estas tendencias las empresas que explotan combustibles fósiles? ¿Cuáles son las perspectivas de mercado para los minerales necesarios para las tecnologías bajas en carbono? ¿Cómo ha sido la integración de fuentes de energías alternativas en el sector minero? Con el apoyo de Cooperación Alemana, GIZ, EIT Colombia, EIT Perú.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much and welcome to this series. I have the honor of welcoming the Vice Minister of Colombia for her welcome address. Madam Minister, please. Good morning, everyone. It is an honor to me to welcome you to this series of webinars that we are going to be opening today and that are the reflection of how Latin America and the Caribbean has implemented through innovation and good practices and has become a reference of other countries implementing around the world the new standards of the extractive industry. As we mentioned in the video, from the Ministry of Mines and Energy of Colombia and the AIT Initiative Colombia, we want to start this series of webinars that we have coordinated with our strategic allies, German Cooperation for Development, GIZ, and IT Peru, the Ministry of Mines and Energy of Peru, MINEM, the APCI, the Peruvian Agency for International Cooperation, and the International Cooperation Agency of Colombia. Germany, Colombia, and Peru have implemented since 2018 a triangular cooperation project for the strengthening of the IT processes in the countries and the exchange of good practices among them. In the framework of this project of cooperation, we're presenting today this webinar series on good practices and trends in the extractive industry. It is 5 sessions where we're going to be addressing different topics related to the industry of extractive resources, where we will be talking about energy transition and accelerated energy transition with the execution of alternative energy projects, the diversification of our mining portfolio, and the capitalization of the reactivation of the hydrocarbon sector. In the energy transition, we have moved forward in the execution of 14 wind and sun projects that were awarded at the end of the 2019 in the bidding processes, and they add 8 billion Colombian pesos, that's $2.12 billion US in investments that will allow us to take a historic leap and go from less than 1% equivalent to more than 12% of participation of non-conventional renewable sources in our energy matrix. And it is precisely there where this becomes more relevant, our bet for the mining diversification, with a huge potential in projects of metallic minerals such as gold and copper at a great scale. These minerals will be essential for the construction of the wind and sun park in the world that will take the new energy to the Colombia and the world households. Currently, we have 9 projects of mining that are priority, and we have called them the Sustainable Develop Reactivation, and they add about 17 billion Colombian pesos, that's 4.5 billion US dollars in investment, and about 35,000 jobs. This is added to the great opportunities that we also have in our small-scale mining, where we also have several opportunities in minerals such as gold that are also fundamental for this energy transformation, but they are also important for the sustainable reactivation of the Colombian territories where we do these activities in a very traditional way. The mining energy sector is part of our lives. Energy, minerals, hydrocarbons, many times without realizing they join us from the moment we open our eyes in the morning until we go to bed in the evening. This is a sector that has been and will continue to be crucial for the development of our country and the world. Our premise is to produce by preserving and preserve producing, always executing this activity in a lawful way with high technical, social, and environmental standards that allow us to protect the environment and reduce gaps. We hope then to have your participation in the following webinars, and from the Colombian extractive industry, we would like to repeat our support to these spaces and the implementation of EITI as a clear sign that the government is committed to lawfulness. Transparency is playing an important role here to strengthen the governance of our sector. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you enjoy this series of webinars that we're opening today. Excellent. Thank you very much, Vice Minister, for your welcoming words and for your support to this initiative. Welcome.
Bienvenidos and welcome also from my side to this first session of the webinar series. I have the pleasure to moderate today's session, which will foresee some presentations in Spanish and some in English. We have simultaneous translation, so please choose the language that you are most comfortable in. And for the purpose of the moderation and also the discussion at the end, we will be doing that in English. I have the honor to be joined by Alexandra Hernandez Saravia today, the Vice President of the Colombian Petroleum Association. She has 25 years of experience in the petroleum sector and jumps in for Francisco Jose Lloreda to give her perspective on the role of oil in the years to come, with a particular focus on Colombia. Danielle Laporta also joins us today. She is a senior mining specialist at the World Bank, having worked there for 16 years, assisting various countries with managing their extractive resources. Most recently, she's been leading a climate smart mining initiative that she will also be presenting on later on. So the plan for today is to start with Alexandra by her giving us an overview of the role of the petroleum sector in Colombia and how companies...
Then Danielle will then give us a general vision of the mineral demand in order to implement energy transition and what does that mean for productive countries. And then I'm myself going to give a small presentation in the end to explain how mining operations can reduce emissions by integrating renewable energies in order to supply that demand. I believe we have a good base for discussion. It's very cheerful, and at the end of the presentations, we're going to have this discussion, and we would appreciate your questions. So please, participants, send your questions during the session. And if therefore any particular panel member, please write down their name, and we will do our very best to answer as many questions as possible. And we have until 1 hour and a half. But maybe we will finish earlier, depending on the number of questions we have. Without any further ado, I would like to give the floor to Alexandra, please. Thank you, Nicolas, and thank you everyone for allowing us to share our vision on energy transition and this vision of the Colombia process. I will speak in Spanish, so let's start. The first part, or an important part, what I would like to start is that the decisions, or making right decisions nowadays, depends greatly on learning the lessons from the past, and foresee the future in order to prepare ourselves in a better way. In that order of ideas, I will refer to three aspects. Where do we come from in Colombia? What lessons have we learned? What can we take on to start? Where are we heading? What is the role of hydrocarbons in this transition? And also, what challenges are we facing as a sector facing this change and this transformation? Firstly, where do we come from? Well, I would like to highlight something is that Colombia, in the last 40 years, effectively lived a transition focused on three elements. The first one was transport. We doubled their participation uh, in the grid of or electric consumption, reaching 40%, and that brought as a consequence a meaningful increase in the demand of diesel. The grid in these last 40 years in Colombia was diesel based. So the second important topic was that we observed in Colombia. This is not only seen from the point of view of the increase of the coverage in the households and municipalities and throughout the country, but also in the use and promotion of natural gas for vehicle use. The third was a meaningful increase of electrical coverage in the different households throughout the country, but especially without removing credit from these projects on the population change or the economic growth, that of course were pillars of this transformation and change in the energy matrix of Colombia. None of this would have been a reality or would have been possible at all if we had not adopted at its due time the public policies that need to be taken. And that is why it is important, as the Vice Minister Carolina was mentioning, and maybe in each one of the countries that are joining us today in this conference, maybe, it's going to be very important to make feasible energy transition and fulfill the climate change goals that countries have set for ourselves for 2050. So it will be necessary to complement this with a public policy framework that is very robust facing this topic. Where are we headed? So this is the second important element. What does the national government foresee in Colombia? We've established some scenarios where we expect that both natural gas as well as electricity in the households will set the main element of consumption for energy in Colombia. This will be both gas and electricity because they have this substitution and a reduction for the reduction of the use of coal, diesel, and timber. Both gas and electric energy will become from 35% that they have today in the energy matrix of Colombia of energy use to 45%. Anyways, it is also important to highlight that the use of diesel and gasoline will continue to have an important weight in the energy matrix, and we estimate there's going to be about 40% and will continue to grow. We foresee to a yearly rate of 1%. What happens is that what we had registered in previous years was that these consumption of fossil fuels were growing at an average yearly rate of 2%, and now they have 43%. So that is why, anyways, in the medium term, we do foresee that they will have a lower participation in the energy grid to provide entry to the use of natural gas and electric energy, as was mentioned and has been disposed by the Colombian government, with a greater participation of renewable sources for the electrical generation. So what is the role in this order of ideas and with this vision of the hydrocarbon sector in this whole scenario of energy consumption that is forecasted for the next 30 years? Well, I would like to talk about three perspectives. The first is from the perspective of exploration and the production of oil and gas. In that order, there will always be, for a country such as Colombia, that depends to a very meaningful extent of its fiscal income comes from this activity of exploration and production of hydrocarbons, because these two sectors will always continue to be very important for the generation of incomes. Not only that the country will require to fund their social projects and economic development, but we will also require the resources of these activities to fund this energy transformation, because this, of course, has associated economic costs that somebody will have to take on, and hopefully we will have that rent coming from the oil and gas production rents in order to fund these novelties. The second element that we also see as important in terms of where we're headed is how we are preparing the companies of the sector facing this transition. And this generates several elements for discussion. The first is internationally, you are witnesses that the oil and gas companies have a tendency to are being called to have a key role in the technological development, not only of the good practices for protection of climate change, and also should have a greater participation as a sector in these goals of reduction of emissions and the mitigation of greenhouse gases, but also in the same leadership in the implementation of technologies for electric generation with non-renewable sources. Not only non-renewable sources, but also renewable sources. But also, and I would like to highlight this, definitely natural gas is going to be the cornerstone of the energy transformation in Colombia and in the world. Why is that? And that is what we have called to be the transition energy that will make a real transformation in the energy matrix feasible, as we foresee it for the next few decades. First of all, because it's a clean alternative that will grow very meaningfully in the next 10 years, while we have from the electric vehicles and we make the technological development viable, because that is still missing for the entry of the renewable sources of energy. Second, it will allow, with its greater consumption, to have a reduction in these emissions, especially in the industrial sector, and its self-generation electric processes. And secondly, is the call to the reliability, to the backup of energy, electricity that is coming from renewable sources. As you know, both wind energy as well as solar energy have peaks and generate peace in their electricity supply. And there is a call to provide a backup and give a permanent 24/7, 365 days a year reliability for electric generation in the country. So natural gas will be the energy that is going to be our backup, and that will allow, because of its low emissions in the atmosphere, to also hand in hand comply with the emission goals that have been set by Colombia. And lastly, what challenges are for Colombia fulfilling these goals? What are the challenges for Colombia? So what are the challenges for the sector and the country? First, how are we going to guarantee sufficient supply of natural gas in the medium term in order to be certain that this energy, which is natural gas, will be or can be the cornerstone that will make energy transformation feasible as we hope it. So for this, the good news is that Colombia has a very important potential, a geological potential, but this should be accompanied by important efforts in investment and exploration in order to get these resources to the surface and be able to put them in a timely fashion into the market. Especially for Colombia, this is a challenge facing. The last few years, we have been registering a reduction, a gradual reduction in the reserves of gas. So the country in the medium term has, in fact, a huge challenge of being able to make the most out of the soil's riches, but at the same time guaranteeing that natural gas will effectively be put to the available, will be made available for users and households. Second topic is that, secondly, energy transition is at a world level, and this foresees in the next few decades a reduction in the oil demand. And as the oil demand will be reduced, the low prices also will be reduced, and therefore Colombia, being an oil country, is going to have a cost of opportunity in time in order to extract this resource. And we need to make the most out of this window of opportunity that we have now when we have better prices in order to perceive through an anticipated production of these reserves, so we can perceive greater fiscal revenues in order to finance, as a Colombian government, the investments that are required for the social and economic development of the country, and thus finance the cost of this transformation of energy that we are planning. So facing the arrival of electric mobility, which is the third topic I want to delve into, and we're going to be facing challenges in terms of infrastructure. The infrastructure of the fuels themselves. We are going to have not only a change in the infrastructure of supply at a gas station level, at a supply plant level, we are going to need to be ready as a country for the arrival of a massification of electric vehicles, and this sets important challenges to a distribution channel of distribution for gasoline and diesel that needs to be adjusted and prepared, and everyone needs to participate in an efficient way and be ready for when this penetration of electric vehicles arrives in a massive way, as we expect it to be. Of course, this all means not only in terms of infrastructure and logistics, but implies some important market challenges in terms of supply of fuels, because as we mentioned before, we are going to have, in any case, a participation of diesel and gasoline in the energy matrix that will continue to be relevant in the next few decades. And facing this, the country needs to have the capacity of guaranteeing the supply both of gasoline as well as diesel, and also cater for these growths that, though they will be lower in terms of demand, anyway, they will continue to be significant. So Colombia currently has, and in the past few decades has been able to be mostly additional to Copetroleo, and the state-owned companies will be very important for the reliability and for the supply of gasoline and diesel, and also join of by suitable infrastructure for supply of fuels, not only for gasoline and diesel, but also to prepare this infrastructure for the entry of electric vehicles. The challenge will be to continue to go on an economic growth path while at the same time comply with the reduction of emissions goals. So without a doubt, this transition will bring environmental and public health benefits for the country, but it will also have costs in terms of revenues that are collected from fuels, and we will need to find a way for both the national government as well as territory entities will find ways, alternative ways, to replace these revenues these tax revenues that today are perceived thanks to taxes over diesel and gasoline, and they will need to be replaced. Currently, the collection of these revenues, we hope that with a decrease of that are forecasted in the consumption of fuel and diesel, this will cost the Colombian government revenues on the rate of, including the VAT, close to 12 billion Colombian pesos per year by 2050. That is per year, and this is massive revenues that will be stop being collected, and we need to foresee for that. We need to prepare for that because among the government plans, we have also have foreseen the purchase and the financing of a transport system, the mass transport system that is going to be based on electric vehicles, and this funding also has a cost that Colombians will have to pay and that the government will need to find the different sources of funding for these costs for transformation. So, in general terms, we all know that for the good of society, for the good of mankind, we need to take this leap, this transformation for energy. The oil and gas sector will continue to be a cornerstone, not only because gas is the call to back up the renewable energy sources entry, but it will also substitute other energies with greater emissions in order to be replaced by gas as a cleaner energy source that is more competitive and more reliable. In that order of ideas, that will be a very important topic, though together with mobility, electric mobility, and the greater participation of these vehicles, will allow the country to comply with the goals that have been set and also the international commitments that we have taken on in terms of emissions and all of the agreements that we have taken part of. So to summarize, these measurements, this will not happen by spontaneous generation. It will not happen overnight. We need to have public policies. The national government and the Colombian government have been very clear and emphatic in making an important bet on this. And they've had this roadmap that has been drafted very clearly for the medium term. And that is going to be a determining factor, as we saw in the last 40 years, to be possible and viable to do this. So, of course, this will also imply costs that as an economy will need to find a way of financing them, of serving them, and maybe the hydrocarbon sector and the extraction of gas and oil will continue to be important in the generation of these revenues in order to fund this transition. So thank you very much, and well, I am here available for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alexandra. We will keep the questions to the end. So for now, I would like to pass the floor to Danielle to start her presentation. Thank you so much, Nick. Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. And thank you so much to GIZ for the invitation. It's actually an honor to be with you today to present the Climate Smart Mining Program from the World Bank that talks about the mineral intensity of the energy transition. And now I will switch to English to do my presentation. And I will share my screen with you.
Can everybody see? Can you see my screen, Nick?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfect, great. So
the Climate Smart Mining Initiative. In 2016, we saw an increase in the interest in some critical minerals that were essential for the renewable energy technologies. At that time, we started analyzing these minerals, and for us, and in the World Bank, it was very important to understand whether or not it was business as usual or if this was going to mean a huge increase in the demand for these minerals in order to supply this transition to clean energies. And when we published our first report in 2017 to analyze the intensity of the transition to clean energy, it was really the first report that was published that did a quantitative analysis. How much more of these minerals are we going to be needing, and where are they going to come from? Because we in the World Bank needed to understand and assure, firstly, that we were going to have a role for those developing countries in order to deliver these minerals that the world needs for these technologies to be developed. And also we needed to help our client countries to manage this need for the critical minerals. So what we did in this moment was to take the climate scenario of the International Agency for Climate and Energy, and we looked what was the participation of minerals in these scenarios, and therefore we used the 4-degree scenario. So that is, if we maintain global warming within 4 Celsius, how much more wind, sun, and batteries are we going to be needing in terms of energy? And we did a mapping backwards to understand what minerals we were going to need to fulfill this scenario, basically. And the main conclusion that came from this report was that the future, the low carbon future, will be very mineral intensive. And now this is something that we all know. Everyone knows very well that this is going to be mineral intensive, the supply chain, and what are the critical minerals that are going to be needed. But at that time, it was something that was very interesting, and it was very surprising as well. We saw results that were very surprising for us, starting from this 2017 report. So things have evolved ever since, and we have published a new report, it's basically an update of the 2017 version, which is called The Mineral Intensity of the Clean Energy Transition. That is from 2020. And it's slightly different from the 2017 report because it contains certain additional characteristics, such as, for instance, this report analyzes how the demand of each mineral will vary depending on, for instance, whether it is used in one technology or if it is used in multiple technologies. And this matters. It matters in terms of how are we developing and planning the mining sector towards the future? How do we plan the projects and how do we position the mining industry in order to deliver these minerals? We also analyze deeply these low carbon technologies and how technological improvements in energy efficiency can have an impact in the demand of minerals. For instance, we have a great discussion regarding the technology of batteries. So one battery or the other, what's best? And we want to understand how this technological innovation will affect the demand of minerals. For instance, cobalt, lithium. We have several new technologies out there, and some of them do not use cobalt, and we wanted to understand how realistic this is, and also in terms of what is our horizon, because our forecasts are until 2050. So I would like to introduce you with the results now. Many times, as you know, in conferences, we present things and people say, oh yeah, but we don't need minerals, we don't need more mining, we're just gonna recycle everything. And we feel that we needed to answer this question. And we analyzed in this new report the potential role of recycling and also the reutilization in order to supply this mineral demand in a 2-degree scenario. For instance, if we really want to scale recycling, what does that mean? And another question that we do often, when we show that the transition to clean energy is going to be very mineral intensive, often people ask, so well, then it's just going to take the problem from fossil fuels to needing a lot more mining. And that is basically the same problem again, isn't it? Basically, it's the same problem, but from the perspective of carbon footprint. So also we needed to answer that question as well. And in this report, we analyzed the carbon footprint of the minerals that we will be needing for low carbon technologies compared to the conventional technologies. And we compare gas with wind turbines, and we analyze the carbon footprint and the differences in the carbon footprint of both. Here we have the first results. And we also have the forecasted demand until 2050 using the data of the International Agency of Energy with their forecasted scenarios. And as you can see, this chart is very clear because it analyzes the different scenarios, it analyzes the intensity of the mineral necessity. And if we want to accomplish, let's say, a 2-degree scenario, we will need 3.1 billion tons of minerals to do so. And this chart also shows us that as the more ambitious we are in our objectives at a world level, the more minerals we will need to achieve that. And what does that mean? It means that we need to understand that mining will be critical in order to achieve our climate scenarios, and mining should and of course will be part of the solution in terms of facing climate change. So here's another graph. This shows us the year demand of minerals forecasted in a 2-degree scenario, again, by using the data of the scenarios of the International Agency of Energy until 2050. And here we compare with the production levels of 2018. And why do we do that? Because we wanted to understand, well, when we did this model in 2018, we wanted to understand what does it mean, or how much more of these minerals and metals we will be needing from 2018 to 2050. And here you can see this is in percentages, and we can see that we have a broad range of minerals and metals in which we will have a significant growth towards 2050 if we're going to be compliant with the 2-degree scenario. So if we see clearly the minerals for batteries, lithium and cobalt, that have huge increases in its demand. And it is very important when we analyze these numbers, we need to understand that we only analyze technologies of energy generation and storage batteries. We do not analyze infrastructure, for instance. Let's say how much money are we going to be need for the infrastructure of these farms in order to calculate all of these technologies or integrate them to the grid, or the necessary infrastructure for the vehicles or electric vehicles, for instance. So really, this has to do with the technologies that will be concentrated in the report. Because in this report, we only focus on the wind, sun, and battery topics. So here, this is 2018, but here we added geothermal energy and other technologies in order to better assess how this demand would be. Another important finding of this report was the risk matrix for the demand, and we wanted to understand how critical will these minerals and metals be? What does this mean in terms of underuse? Whether they're going to be using one technology or several technologies? And we wanted to also understand how much more of these minerals we need in terms of the current production in order to map how critical they are. And here we have in the first quadrant, we have some that have medium impact, that are the ones that have a lower impact on the clean energy demand. These are the ones that are used in a broad range and in various technologies, in very specific technologies, but their increase in the demand will be less in comparison to the comparison of 2018. And because we use them in a smaller amount, this demand will not grow significantly or exponentially, but this doesn't mean that they're any less critical. Because, for instance, in quadrant 1, we see minerals that are critical, rare earths, and they're criticals for wind technology, for instance. So it's very important to take them into account. In quadrant number 2, we have mapped those high impact minerals. The importance that they have is because the demand for these minerals will increase exponentially compared to their production of 2018. However, these minerals are only used in very specific technologies. And again, here we have those minerals for batteries, lithium and cobalt. And as batteries continue to evolve, the criticality of these minerals might or might not stay relevant. And we see a great increase in the production of graphite, for instance, and lithium or cobalt, and we cannot produce batteries without graphite. So this quadrant shows that we have a huge increase in the demand of graphite. However, these minerals are used for very specific technologies. Quadrant number 3, we have high impact minerals in general. They have a huge impact and a huge increase in the demand. For instance, aluminum, that, well, it's not a mineral, but it's a critical metal that we will need in a broad range of technology. So therefore, it doesn't really matter what technology we're talking about. Aluminum is a key part of the transition toward renewable energies. And in quadrant number 4, we have minerals that do the whole sector, and they're important because they're used in a broad range of technologies and they do not depend on one particular technology. However, when they are produced compared to 2018, they will not be as big. But we have to remember that, as I mentioned before, we're only talking about the generation and storage of energy. We're not talking about infrastructure, because if we see copper, for instance, the demand for copper, according to our model, is going to be limited. But if we, in a realistic way, analyze this in terms of all of the uses of copper, it will have a very meaningful increase in terms of the demand of copper from here to 2050. And this is something that also was an important finding in the 2017 report and was again confirmed in 2020. And it is that the intensity of minerals for transition towards clean energy doesn't have to do only with niche minerals such as lithium, cobalt, and others, but also has to do with metals, basic metals. We're going to be needing more copper, more iron ore, more nickel, and this is something that is also important, and this also helps us to better understand where this demand is coming from in order to do the transition to a clean technology. So this is only an example to show what we have mapped in our report, and has to do with copper. Because why is it important to have examples of copper? Because copper is a mineral used in a broad variety of technologies, and as you can see in the screen, we have mapped the accumulative demand of copper by type of energy technology until 2050 in the 2-degree scenario. And as you can see, based on these technologies that we have here, solar PV, wind, concentrated solar power, wind, hydro, nuclear, the demand of copper for all of these technologies will increase in a very meaningful way. But copper is used basically in all of the technologies, geothermal, nuclear, hydraulic. We will need copper in order to come to this 2-degree scenario. So recycling, I believe, is very important to try to deal with this topic, because we have analyzed the impact of recycling on the cumulative demand of aluminum and copper, for instance, in the 2-degree scenario. Again, we did this to try to understand, because people kept asking us that, they ask over and over, is it that we really need more minerals or more mining? Can we just recycle everything? And well, we do need more mining. Fortunately, we do need more mining, because even if we scale this to 100% of recycling rate of end of life cycle for aluminum from here to 2050, by increasing the recycling rate to 61%, it's still not going to be enough. So it's not going to be demand to supply the demand of aluminum, and the same goes for copper, which means that, as you can see, we have the refining of primary aluminum, which is the darker red on the bar. And then we also have secondary aluminum available, which is in the lighter red. And as you can see in the chart, we actually will be needing this. We'll need to have mining in order to supply this demand for these minerals. And also we analyze other minerals, but for some of them it's very difficult. Really, we don't have a lot of data available that we are gonna need to understand recycling more. So some niche minerals such as lithium or cobalt, we really don't have a lot of data on them. However, I will try to briefly deal with this topic towards the end, but we are analyzing now the point of recycling of batteries in order to try to understand how we'll be developing this impact in terms of the demand for mineral. Another important aspect of the new report is the global warming potential, GWP. So it's accumulative to 2050. So we talk from cradle to gate, the whole process. We talk from the extraction of the mineral to processing operations in the renewable electricity generation. So in order to produce, for instance, let's say a wind turbine or a solar panel, so we talk from extraction of minerals, its processing, the generation, and also the storage of renewable energies compared to the fossil technologies. And why is this important? It is important because when we show this to people, they say over and over, all right, so you are the World Bank, you're saying that renewable energy is not sustainable and is bad. And what we want to say is no, it's not that. In fact, what we want to say is that despite the fact that we will be needing more minerals and metals, even still from the perspective of climate, it still continues to be better than, let's say, still use coal or gas, as you can see on this chart. Because the global warming potential of coal and gas is greatly superior to the one of renewable generation and storage included. And even though these numbers are a lot more detailed in the report, it is difficult to present the technology that we use and discuss so briefly all of the information in the report. However, you can have access to our website. I will share it where you can see the actual report with all of the information related to the global warming potential of the technology. Can you please wrap up? You're running out of time. All right. Okay, I'm so sorry. I will briefly finish my presentation. For us in the World Bank, it's important to understand, so where do these minerals come from? As I mentioned, there are challenges and also opportunities in the transition to clean energy. And for the World Bank and us, it has been very important to help those developing countries, our client countries, to make the most of this benefit and also can improve their sector, their mining sector. And this leads us to climate smart mining, which is, what does it mean? So why it's important? This supports the extraction, processing, and the responsible recycling of minerals that are going to be critical for low carbon energies, while minimizing its material footprint and scaling technical assistance and investment in mineral-rich developing countries. So that is, we want to ensure that the supply chain of critical minerals is managed in the best possible way from the climate and environmental perspective. And how do we do that? We do this with the climate smart mining building blocks. So, and this is the framework that we're going to be using to do an assessment of this supply chain or critical supply chains in order to help countries to understand where their gaps are and where do they need to improve their processes in terms of having a supply chain for these critical minerals and materials. And again, I know that this is a lot of information to understand it just at a glance. So now we will listen about the integration and the sustainability in mining, and this is a critical thing for climate smart mining. So there are aspects regarding geodata and how to use geodata to position us in a better way for supplying these critical minerals in order to basically supply them for the world in order to achieve a low carbon future. And with this, I will finish my presentation. We have a lot of deliverables that we're going to be publishing this year, and one of them, a very important one, is the report on the role of recycling for battery technologies, which is something that I have the pleasure of being able to share with you. As soon as it's ready, I will do so. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I'm so sorry I had to interrupt your presentation. I'm just trying to keep everyone on schedule. So I will now share my presentation, which I have prepared in Spanish.
Well, I will be presenting on one of the building blocks, like Daniel said, of the climate smart mining, which is the integration of renewable energies in the mining sector. And I will try to keep it brief to make sure that we have enough time to take questions. We have received many questions so far. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them now so that we can answer them later on. Just to provide some context and to mention how this topic is related to the work that we do, I work for a project that's called Regional Cooperation for the Sustainable Management of Mining Resources in the Andes countries, MINSUS, and we work in the 5 Andes countries that you see in the map to your left-hand side. Our counterparty in the region is ICLAC, and that is why we're based in Santiago, Chile. And a very important aspect for us is to work alongside with the different counterparties in order to see how to move forward in the issue of sustainability in the mining sector. So depending on the work area, we work with the government, civil society, the private sector, and also the academia. The component where this topic becomes relevant is, out of all 3, is the component related to technological transfer and promotion of the innovation. And at the moment we are conducting 2 studies, one in Colombia and one in Peru, to see what is the potential of integrating renewable energies in the mining sector of these 2 countries. And I hope to have those studies ready by the end of the year. Well, in order to begin with my presentation, I'd like to show you the current outlook. This is a graph that shows the different energy projects of renewable energies that are located either on mine sites or are owned by mining companies. So as you can see, there is a growing trend. And in color blue, you see the hybrid projects where there is a mix of solar PV with wind or also with battery-based technologies. And why is this? Well, basically due to the prices. This is a graph from IRENA that shows the trends of the energy prices or the prices of large-scale energy projects from 2010 to 2019. And as you can see, especially in solar PV, in concentrated solar power and also wind, the prices are dropping very quickly. And in darker gray, you can see the relationship with the costs of energy projects that are based on fossil fuels. So as you can see, the prices are dropping at a point where they are very competitive, and in many cases more competitive than fossil fuel-based projects. What are some of the key factors that determine a supply agreement with mining companies? This is a table that shows the different categories. One that I would like to focus on is the access and grid stability. because the supply of energy depends heavily on that. If you're connected to the grid or not, that is a very strong argument for the integration of renewable energies, because many times the alternatives are diesel projects that are very expensive, and if you are connected to the grid and that's unstable, there is definitely potential to have backup systems that can be based on renewables as well. And if you are connected to the network, there is a possibility of selling into the grid. But at the same time, many times a network is cheaper than producing oneself. So many times there is a certain balance to be achieved. Later on, I will give you some examples of the different stages of the projects, where there are examples of different countries that already have that integration in place. Most of the supply agreements of renewable energies in mining companies are the first two, either self-generation, where the renewable energy project is built by the mining company to serve their own operation, or a purchase agreement where the mining company buys the energy to an independent producer through a power purchasing agreement. The other three types of agreements are much more widely used in other sectors. For instance, specifically the sector that would include Google or Apple, they have many different types of agreements in place. We have agreements for the sale of energy, which is highly dependent on whether you are connected to the grid or not. And there are three alternatives: selling into the grid if you have a surplus of generation, then you have the installation of energy within the mining site if you're located in an area that has good potential for renewables, and also in those areas where you are not connected to the grid and there are communities around you, there are projects where the energy project also can provide electricity to the surrounding communities. Here we have some examples in the different stages of the projects. For instance, in the case of exploration, this is an example that is a solar PV system of a small scale, which is supplying an exploration camp, and more or less it supplies 70% of the electricity demand of that camp. This is another project which is based in Australia, which is not connected to the grid, and it is one of the largest projects that's not connected to the grid. And it is done by a mining company with 10.6 megawatts of solar capacity, 19 megawatts of diesel, and 6 megawatts of batteries. So this is a hybrid system that can supply up to 90% of the energy demand during the daytime, which is more or less 12,000 tons of CO2 a year. This is an example that is here in Chile, and this is connected to the grid via a power purchasing agreement between the mining company and the company that provides energy. And that project came to replace more or less 85% of the fossil fuel that was used in the processing of copper. And last, one project that has not been put in place yet, you can see further away in the picture, there is a photovoltaic installation, and closer to the front, there is a site that's no longer operating, and it is being used to pump water. So during the daytime, the electricity that's produced by the photovoltaic park is helping pump the water for the site that's closer, and during the nighttime, the water goes from that site to the site that's below that, and in that way it generates electricity. So this is an operation that can run 24 hours a day. Now, looking at the trends, in this sense, it's very important to mention that As you saw already, the prices of renewable energies, which I believe is the most important factor that's pushing this shift. And it will continue to be the case, but most likely not at the same pace as we've seen recently, but particularly the prices of the batteries that are decreasing very quickly at the moment will guarantee that projects that are not connected to the grid, especially, can incorporate batteries and use a higher percentage of renewable energies in comparison to what they would have had without batteries. This is a Bloomberg graph that shows the agreements between private companies and companies that produce renewable energies, and as you can see, they are also increasing rapidly. So there is definitely a strong interest from the private sector to enter these type of agreements. This is a graph that shows not only mining companies but also companies from other sectors. Regarding regulatory trends, we see that there are many different countries that are putting in place or starting with initiatives to fix the carbon prices, so that will make the prices of fossil fuels more expensive, and at the same time it will make renewable energy projects more attractive. And from that, we move on to the different incentives that exist, especially from the sector of the buyers of the minerals, and at the same time from international investors that are putting more and more attention to the carbon footprint of their products. So I took some pieces that have been published in the latest weeks. The first one, Elon Musk promises a giant contract for sustainable nickel miners. Apple is committed to become 100% neutral in carbon for their supply chain and product chain by 2030, which is only 10 years from now. And also, they have started to buy low carbon aluminum already. And to the right hand side, one of the largest investors in the world, BlackRock, has put 240 companies under their surveillance list due to their insufficient progress in addressing climate change, and I believe that this pressure will definitely increase to the mining sector. And as you can see, all of this is after the pandemic, so I myself don't believe that this pressure will go away and it will not decrease due to the pandemic. It will actually be the opposite. It will continue to grow in the following years. And with that, I would like to wrap up my presentation. And many of the information that I've presented, much of that information is available in these documents that you see to the right hand side, renewable energy in mining. So if you're interested, please feel free to take a look at those documents. With that, thank you so much, and I will stop sharing my screen. Well, if the speakers could please resume their video connection, that would be great. Great, perfect. Let's see the questions. We have received so many questions so far. I will try to connect two questions that we've received that are questions for the Vice Minister Carolina and also for Alexandra. What strategy should countries that benefit from fossil fuel exports, such as Colombia, adopt to best prepare for and manage the energy transition in the timeline needed? And another question, which is also related to that, for Alexandra, you mentioned the policies that you would like the governments to see or to put in place to prepare the country for the transition. What are those policies from your perspective? Would you like to start, Vice Minister? Yes, thank you, Nicholas. Thank you for that. Well, precisely. I believe that that is the key word. The key word here is transition. Many countries, and Colombia is no exemption to that, still heavily rely economically and for their development on the exploitation of hydrocarbons that are fossil. And let's say that we have to be prepared for that transition, but above all, we have to take into account the economic contribution that the country receives from that sector and to see how to mitigate the lack of that contribution in the mid-term. And there have been interesting discussions, for instance, in the framework of the EITI. One conversation revolves around what the impact of the transition will be on the finance of the countries, on the job rates, on the generation of incomes that the sector has. So I believe that we have to invite everyone to take a look at the transition in a more comprehensive manner. We have to consider the opportunities as well, because Daniel explained that minerals will be needed for the transition, and that's an opportunity. And from the public policy, in Colombia, we have tried to diversify our mining matrix to contribute to that transition from the mining sector. But also, in the case of Colombia, we are producers of coal mainly, and we have to take a look at the transition of those regions that produce coal. And in the case of hydrocarbons, as Alexandra said, I'm sure she will go back to that, we have to think about which hydrocarbons will make a higher and higher contribution to the energy transition. We have to take a look at gas, because gas is a fossil fuel that has lower emissions. So to make a transition to gas would be important, but for that we have to put in place policies to achieve that potential. But once again, the key takeaway is that the energy transition is a transition. It won't happen overnight. It brings along many opportunities and many challenges, especially for countries that heavily rely on fossil fuels and on the exploitation of fossil fuels. So, an innovation, for instance, in the generation of energy using fossil fuels can also be an opportunity for those countries that continue to produce energy using these elements. But the transition needs to be embraced with its challenges and opportunities. That's the right perspective, in my opinion. That's great. Alexandra? Well, there's so much to be said in terms of public policies, and there are many examples that can be and need to be put in place as well. I believe that we have to go step by step. There are different sides to this discussion. First of all, I would like to go back to the words of the Vice Minister regarding gas, right? Gas is called to be the fuel of the transition in order to be a backup for renewable energies, because that is what provides reliability to the highs and lows of the supply of electricity from solar and from wind. But for that, we have to take a look at two things. First of all, we have to produce more gas, which means to use what we have underground at the moment. We need to make that feasible somehow. And there are two elements to consider, at least from the perspective of public policies. First, opposite to the economic theory that each supply generates its own demand, I am convinced it's actually the other way around. Each demand generates its own supply, especially in a country that has resources underground readily available. What do I mean by this? When we talk to the companies that are interested in investing in projects of exploration and production of gas, what is their first driver for investment? They say a bigger market for gas in Colombia. And if you have someone to sell to, you will produce. The Colombian market of gas is a small market overall. There is a small demand that can be covered easily with one or two large projects or large deposits that are discovered. So if someone wants to make a bet to invest on that. Of course, they need to have the opportunity to sell that to the market, otherwise, it makes no sense. So, at the public policy, I believe that everything comes together in order to provide clear, strong signals of policies that are put in place to promote and to boost the gas demand, not only because of the transition, it's also due to the goals of climate change, because of we need a backup, because it has to be done. For instance, in the case of massive transportation, not only within the municipalities but also interurban transportation, that represents a huge challenge that we have to work on. Secondly, the industry. The industry still has a huge potential to replace certain fuels that are using now that are polluting more, and they can replace that with gas. That is a trade off that we can do with other fuels. And of course, there is a discussion to be had, and the economic trade off needs to be considered. But we have to consider the competitiveness of gas in Colombia. And for us, what we have seen, according to the studies we have conducted, there is a small variable in terms of the cost of transportation of gas using gas pipes that has to be analyzed. Why is that? Because the consumption centers, as opposite to other countries, is on the inner regions of the country, but the supply is growing mainly along the Atlantic coastline. So somehow we have to connect the center where the consumption of gas happens to the industry, to the production. There needs to be a connection for urban transportation, for transportation to the inner cities of the country, and that connection needs to be done in a competitive manner. We need to reach out from the Atlantic coast, where the supply is, to the rest of the country. So that's a key challenge, and it's based on regulations, public policies, and the national government, through the Commission of Regulation, is analyzing that to see how to decrease that cost, how to actually shift towards using natural gas, but in a way that's competitive. Otherwise, if the costs of connecting the Atlantic coast to the inner region of the country is too high, then gas will just not be a feasible alternative, which is highly sensitive to the energy cost. So, to make that possible, that has to do with public policies, and we have to take a closer look at that if we want the industry to actually demand more gas. Now, an example of a public policy in terms of greater gas consumption, we have gone through that already. In the last 40 years, natural gas became widely used, not only because the population grew, because the economy grew, it was also because the government gave strong signals for that to happen, to convert, for instance, vehicles to natural gas. Also, public investments were put in place to provide coverage of the network of natural gas to the different regions, also especially isolated areas in the country. That was a huge effort, and the public policies will have to be put in place. This will have to be the second phase, or the phase for the following decades of gas massification, and that will be highly related to transportation, to public transportation, also load transport, and competitiveness of the industry. Regarding exploration and production, there's so much to be done, both for oil and gas, from the perspective of fiscal benefit, to work on that. And I don't want to go into detail so that there's time left for other questions, but I believe that there are certain elements that we have to focus on. And this is something that EITI is working on. Of course, EITI is the instance why we are here together. And one of the key challenges of the extractive industry, not only oil and gas, but also the mining company, is to be able to operate in the different regions in a proactive manner, with collaboration, with sustainability, with the involvement of the communities. That is a huge challenge that we have as a sector overall. It contains issues of public policy, it contains other issues as well, and there needs to be a work conducted with the civil society to engage in a relationship based on trust with the public sector, with the extractive sector, with the civil society, of course, with its representatives, and we have to improve that. We have to work on that so that the projects can move forward in a sustainable manner with the communities. And once again, that is the importance of EITI because it is an instance to generate trust for projects to move forward. Now, what is the importance of these initiatives for a country? I would like to summarize, and I'm sorry that I'm looking at this from the financial perspective. It is the cost of opportunity. At this moment, we have a window of opportunity to explore and produce resources, oil, gas, and minerals. The time is now. Facing the energy transition, a few decades from now, the prices will continue to decrease because other resources will come along to produce energy. So, if we don't produce that wealth today with higher prices, we will have the possibility of having lower prices, and we won't be able to generate as many resources that the regions need, that the governments need, in order to carry out social investment and also the investments that are required for the transition. So it's not only about producing, it's about producing now because there is a window on opportunity that we have to use now. There is a cost on opportunity, and that time will not continue on forever. Now, regarding fuels, we could go on and on and on, but to make it brief, there are issues related to the supply of fuels, infrastructure, competitiveness, and there are different sources of supply, which means that, for instance, the service stations with gasoline and diesel, they will be competing in the future with the possibility of charging your vehicle at home. So the industry needs to be prepared, it needs to be adapted, and I'm sure it's something that we have to think about as a country overall, whether we have to shift towards a more free, maybe a less regulated scheme in terms of prices and just let energies compete with each other. But we also have to find a way to replace that income that we will lose due to the taxes that won't be collected from diesel. The governments will not have those resources anymore as these fuels are less and less used. So there are certain policies, prices of the fuels, for instance, and we have to take a look at that. Maybe a deregulation of the market so that other agents enter the competition and maybe other energies enter the competition as well. And that is part of the interesting and the passioning issues that are included in the energy transition. Thank you so much. We have not much time left, unfortunately. I would like to take a couple of questions. There are so many questions that are related to Colombia here. But a question that is also related to the topic that Daniel talked about, and it is what countries are most advanced in implementing climate smart mining practices, and what factors do you see countries adopting the strategies?
If you could keep it very brief and short, please. Yes, of course, I will. Well, there is a country that is well advanced in the implementation of climate smart mining, and it's Chile. Chile is way ahead in terms of the implementation of the framework of climate smart mining, firstly, because of the great integration of renewable energies in mining. Chile really has done a brilliant work in that sense, and also, for instance, they have advanced also in the other basic building blocks where Chile has done great progress. So, yes, that Chile is the first thing that comes to mind. I will take the liberty to fuse two questions for Colombia. And please, I would appreciate if your answers are brief. But I believe that both of you talked about gas and how gas is going to be the fuel of transition in a manner of speaking, but we don't have enough time between now and 2050 to fulfill the Paris Agreement. That will be these 1.5 or 2 degree levels, these objectives and goals that have been set. So Is the investment in gas the real focus of the right answer, or should we maybe use or invest in hydrocarbons and not invest in a technology that's going to be intermediate, that will not be very good for fulfilling the Paris goals?
Thank you, Nicolas. I would respond this. The strategy of Colombia has been to diversify its energy matrix. So, as I said it earlier, this has to do with having a development of renewables, for instance, wind and solar PV, but also we have to diversify into other sources of energy because also renewables, as we know, face certain challenges in terms of storing energy, for instance, and also for the reliability of the grid. We still need fossil energies unless there is a technological breakthrough at some point. Definitely, we will need fossil fuels in the meantime, at least from here to 2050, less and less in time, but they will continue to be necessary. That's why it's so important to bet on natural gas because of fossil fuels. Gas has the lower emissions, but also we have to continue to work on this. And this is an invitation to everyone involved in the discussion. We need to continue to innovate in technology to recover or to decrease emissions. In the case of mining in Colombia, there are deposits of coal that are very important. So, any innovation in that sense to use that potential can definitely help us in this strategy of diversification and transition. So, in summary, we believe that yes, they will continue to be necessary unless there is a major technological breakthrough that help us store the energy from renewables. And definitely the government is making a bet on that, but still we need to have a certain backup running. In the meantime, that will be gas, I would say, and that's all I have to say on that. Okay, Alexandra, could you please take a couple of minutes to respond to that because we are about to finish? Thank you. Well, actually, there's nothing left to say apart from what the Vice Minister said. I'd like to point out two things only. First, gas is important because gradually other renewable energies will be incorporated, and this will be a process. It won't happen overnight. So we need a cleaner energy that allows us and help us through that gradual incorporation of renewables in the meantime. On the other hand, once renewable energies are fully used, I insist gas needs to continue to be available because renewable energies have highs and lows. We do not have sunlight 24 hours a day. You know what I mean? There are highs and lows with wind energy as well, so the demand for energy is something that we need at all times, and the government needs to guarantee that there is a supply so that the country continues to work. And that's why, in the long run, natural gas needs to continue to serve as a backup through the transition. It needs to be our backup to have that reliability, to have that availability for the electrical system to operate. Great, that was great. Thank you so much. We are getting so many questions, but unfortunately, we are running out of time. And I promised Andres Garzon that we were going to finish on time, so I would like to thank all of you. Thank you so much, Vice Minister, Alexandra, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to all the audience. Thank you for attending, and thank you for sending very good questions in. And as I said it at the beginning of the webinar, we'll have 4 more webinars. So I hope that you are interested and that you join us once again. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye bye. Thank you.
Chao.
Gracias. Hasta luego. Bye.